Thank you for coming. My name is Fred Wariski. I'm with the Ocean Tracking Network, and I am your moderator for today. Panel 4 on research facilities in a data-intensive and open science world. So data is obviously of interest to everybody here. We have 3 groups that are going to speak to their experiences, and the purpose of the talks are really to stimulate discussion and draw out from you the insights and things that you have learned through the scars that you have developed as you try to manage the data that has been flooding into your systems. I'm under specific instructions from CFI to keep everything on time. They have threatened me with a new round of specific ineligible expenses for my MSI if we do not keep everybody on time here. So we will do that, and it's obviously important to have the time for the discussions, but also for the chair report out from the MSI meeting afterwards. So we'll try to do that. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring our first speaker up, which is Natalie Harrower, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Research Data Centre Network. And Natalie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Can you hear me all right? I know that the microphone, yeah, I have a thumbs up from the back of the room, so that's a good start to the morning. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks so much to the organizers. This has been a fantastic workshop to be at. I'm very new to this role, brand new to the MSIs, and newly back in Canada, so it's a really great opportunity for me to see what's going on and network with other people and all of the rest. So, as I get started, as I said, I'm new. I took over the executive director position at CRDCN at the start of April, so I think I'm just around the 7-month mark, which it feels like it's flown by in about 1 month, but you know, that's the way these things go. So what my talk will be on today is more about the potential for CRDCN when it comes to elements of open science, to supporting that, in particular around fair data and the jigsaw of things that are required to move in that kind of direction. And also, maybe just a bit of a nod to the power that we have in the room as a group of MSIs to try to move some of these elements together collectively. And we should use that network for those purposes. So I've been asked, I guess, to set the tone a little bit for this panel on open science, because my background is really quite fully in the open science area in the last number of years. So I have a more extensive background in that than I have in CRDCN. So I'll focus on that for today. Just as by way of what that background is, I was in the world of digital repositories in Europe, specifically in Ireland, for a number of years, working on research infrastructures on fair sustainability and that kind of thing. Okay, now, slides. Green. Success. Before I get started, Peter Stoichev, when he opened the conference of the workshop yesterday, said something that I thought was really quite remarkable, in that reconciliation is the greatest cultural opportunity that we face in Canada. And I really want to echo that statement, and I was happy to hear him say that. So McMaster University is the host for CRDCN. That's where we're located, and this is on the traditional lands of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So I'd like to acknowledge that before I start. Okay, so what are we? One thing I'm learning over these last couple of days is that we're quite unique in the MSI landscape. I think that we're a little bit different than the kind of work that you do, because really we are all about data access and sharing and supporting the things that are required around that in terms of training and networking and understanding the data and that sort of thing. So we're one of the 19 MSIs. We support about 2,400 researchers at a given time. We have 33 secure data facilities. So again, another different thing is that you had all these nice pictures of buildings, and we got to see the facilities yesterday. But our network is really, I would say, about the people, because it's a virtual kind of network, and we have RDCs in most of the universities across the country. We have over 200 data sets and lots of publications and articles and outputs that come out of that. Our vision, which is our vision for the next 6 months or so, because we're in the middle of building our next strategic plan, is to be Canada's national platform for leading-edge research and training in the quantitative, social, and population health sciences and the benefits that go with that. I think that CRD-SAN has started to get there already in terms of that vision, so we might be looking at a slight revision. But the key elements you see on the right, it's supporting research and enabling researchers, providing the training that is needed for that, but then also this other piece, and I think this is really key, linking researchers and the researchers they produce to policymakers. So what's happening in terms of the programs, for example, that the government is rolling out? Are they effective? The research can help to answer some of those questions, and we kind of broker those relationships. The key thing is that we are a partnership with Statistics Canada. So at the moment, all of the data that we provide access to is Stats Canada data in the domains that I mentioned before. It's a very important and robust relationship, and it's key because they have some public data sets, but the very sensitive data sets, so data sets that include your personal information, are the ones that are routed through the RDC program, and the security around that is very high. This is just a quick look at some of the subject areas that we support. I see someone raising their camera, so I'll wait a sec. Don't you hate it when you try to take a picture of a slide and then it changes? Anyway, it's changing. Here's some of the example data sets that are in those areas. I won't spend too much time going into them in the interest of time. But what is the kind of research that comes out of that? So I just pulled a few things from a series that we have called Research Policy Snapshots. And this is a kind of one-page attempt to say, what is the key driving findings in this research that could impact policy decisions in the future? So if you can see here, effective heat and air quality on elderly mortalities and emergency visits. There's a health one. There's also a COVID meets education at the bottom in terms of impact on test scores. House price effects. I don't know if anyone from Vancouver is interested in that on the SkyTrain, based on the SkyTrain expansion. Is legal pot making illegal pot any less prevalent in the environment? I will leave you all on a cliffhanger with that one. You can look them up and find out the answers. But that's the kind of example. As I mentioned, we're focusing on our strategic plan, so looking at ways we can support that nexus even more, because I think that's really key. And we are also building virtual access to the research data as part of a virtual research data center. So this is a tech project. Researchers will now be able to, when we roll this out next year, to access the data from their home or office computers, because right now they have to go into the buildings to do it. Okay. So let me shift into the topic of open science. One of the key things I want to mention is that, and I don't know where everyone is on the open science spectrum, I guess, in terms of implementation or knowledge, but the way that I've come to view it, especially with the work that I did with the European Commission and the OECD in Europe, is that it's very much a number of different pillars that are required to support one another. And part of the issue is that one element of this pie, or these pillars, sometimes might be waiting for the other elements to come in place in order to move forward. And that's a difficult kind of thing. We have to move all of these together at the same time. But if I think about what we can do at CRD-SAN, then I look to the top right, which is around the area of fair data or fair outputs. And that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, if that's not a familiar term. So if take a closer look at that, what are the ways that we might be able to support moving this forward? So one of the key things I want to say is we're already doing it, because facilitating data sharing is our core activity. So I've got a check mark on that one, moving in that direction. However, and I thought I'd use an old school animation there, the sharing of sensitive personal data comes with very significant considerations and restrictions to ensure privacy. Right? So I think most people in the room would agree you don't want your personal data being leaked in any way with your name associated, so the controls are very tight. But I would think most reasonable people would also want the value or the learnings from your data to be aggregated and used to find solutions to difficult problems. So how do we manage trying to work towards fair and a sense of openness when we're in this very restricted environment? There's two approaches that I've been thinking around. So one is to look very closely at what role can we play in the research data lifecycle. And I think one of the most important things here is around standardization. It was mentioned yesterday, so that if you're producing a data output, can it be used by anyone else? Do they know what it, do they have documentation to understand it? Is it in a format that can be used? And I loved the tours yesterday. So when we were in the International Vaccine Center, VIDO, for that tour, someone that was speaking, I think, oh, I forget his name, sorry, but he was giving us a tour of the equipment that makes vaccines. And he said, we purchased these machines right here, these ones on purpose, because they are compatible with the production level machines. So we're doing all the R&D to develop a vaccine. The outputs can then be put right into the chain of the output. And this is about physical equipment. The same has to be done with data. There really is no difference in terms of that. So some of the areas that we'll be working on are how do you create fair data in a sensitive data environment. And a key point here is that fair does not equal open. I think there's a misconception that for data to be fair, it has to be open. It doesn't. It has to be, there's a phrase, it has to be as open as possible is the goal, but as restricted as necessary depending on the security constraints. And there's lots of other areas we can look at in here. What kind of persistent identifiers might enable, again, sharing without giving anything away? Can we look at citation practices? Can we share code to help move the research process forward in collaborative kinds of ways? And then there's a few others there, but I won't go into them other than to mention there's a lot that you can do around relationship building and knowledge exchange, which is part of this open citizen science element of open science, around the CARE principles or the OCAP principles and working with that kind of thing. So that's one thing, is what do we do at the kind of granular level around FAIR that could move things forward? But then the other thing, and this is where I think having everyone in the room is really useful, is what kind of role can we play nationally in this venture? Coming again out of the European environment and working with colleagues in Australia as well, I see a kind of top-level coordination around open science much more present in the research ecosystem than I see it here in Canada. So we need to get on board. And again, as I said, we make the sensitive data available to researchers, but this also means that we have this rich and varied community of researchers that are working towards in common kinds of ways. So how can we harness the power of that community to move forward? Can we support other elements of open science? Policy work, advocacy. It's really a complex jigsaw puzzle, and it requires all parts to move forward. And so I'll come back to this diagram as I finish. For example, if we look at the sort of middle right there, reform of research assessment, this is looking about metrics and trying to get away from high-impact journals and towards more qualitative measures. Is there anything that we can do to support this? This is high on the agenda in a lot of different areas. How can we support researchers in our MSI? Are there training that we can provide around open science practices? And then also, can we advocate with our host or other institutions, or the institutions that all the researchers are in, to recognize the value of data sharing and data curation in those activities? Because if people are doing it, researchers are doing it, and they don't know the value of that sharing because they're done with the data, then there's not much of an incentive to move forward. So it needs to be part of promotion, tenure, and review, and that kind of thing. It has to be recognized. And of course, research infrastructures are key. So how do we provide, I don't know if anyone in the room is interested in this topic, how we provide sustainable support for research infrastructures. That was sarcasm, by the way. So of course, that's really important in our area. And then I will end on this note because I'm passing off to my co-panelist, also around support for open access to publications. What are the links that happen there? So journals will often ask for data availability statements. So that's how I can see someone like us on the data side connecting with Coalition Publica, who I will pass on to right now, after I plug our conference, which is happening very soon at McMaster or in Hamilton. And if anybody's interested in these topics, we'd love you to join crdcn.ca. Thank you very much.
And the handoff occurs. Suzanne Beth, coming from Coalition Publica. She's the principal coordinator for the group. Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Susan Beth. I'm working for the RD consortium, which is half of Coalition Publica, the MSI about which I will talk today. And I wanted to say that I'm quite new as well in my position, so yeah, I may not be able to reply to every question. Okay. Okay, so Coalition Publica is a partnership between RD and the Public Knowledge Project, or PKP. PKP is a group based at Simon Fraser University who develops open journal systems, or OJS, an open source software that manages editorial activity for scholarly journals. That is researcher to reader, workflow for submission, peer review, and the digital production of articles. RD, on its side, is supported by 3 Quebec universities, and it's hosted at the Université de Montréal. And its activities revolve around the RD.org dissemination platforms. So listening to the presentation yesterday really made me realize how different we are, but it echoes a lot what Natalie just said about CRDCN, but we are pretty different from the other or most MSI. I would say before, because Coalition Publica belongs to the field of social sciences and the humanities, but also because we're committed to a field or part of research which tends not to be fully included in the research cycle per se. However, essential, I would say, and even strategic it is. Scholarly publishing is a really key sector in contemporary academia, not only because journals are the site where research findings are shared and made public, and as such can also be the starting point of new inquiry, but I would say even more critically because journal articles have become the basis of the most prevalent practices for research, for the evaluation of research and researchers. So citations, the impact factor, are widely used for the assessment and promotion of professors. So what is included or not in this calculation is a key aspect of research assessment and its circulation. I would say that it's at the tipping point today or nowadays because open access uptake is accelerating. It's also pushed by public policy. But the choices have yet to be made regarding the form that this adoption will take. The movement for open access emerged in the years 2000 in reaction to what is commonly called now the serials crisis, and it names a situation reached in the 1990s resulting from the steep rise in prices for institutional or library subscription to scholarly journals, while academic library budgets remain static, compromising some libraries' ability to keep on purchasing those subscriptions. So this situation implied a new kind of restriction in access to knowledge for some research community. And this is the reason for the emergence of the open access movement. Now that its adoption is accelerating, we see that the condition and practices of knowledge dissemination are really changed or modified by these principles. Coalition Publica, its mission is really to maximize the circulation of data, and in our case, this data is scholarly articles, Canadian journals, scholarly articles. This, of course, requires free access to this text, but this is not enough to ensure the discoverability that allows for circulation in contemporary digital environment. Editors in Canadian journals are most of the time professors, experts in their field of study, but not in digital publishing. And so Coalition Publica's services support their work in deploying the practices that will maximize the visibility of their journals and the circulation of their articles. So Coalition Publica as an infrastructure, I would say, has three main facets. And the first facet is the technological one, so I will present that first. So this national infrastructure we are building support a workflow specific to digital scholarly journal publishing. It combines, as I mentioned earlier, OJS, the editorial management software developed by PKP, and Erudit's dissemination platform. OJS is a distributed system which can be freely installed on any server, and in Canada, it's mostly maintained by academic libraries. It's an inexpensive and autonomous way to manage editorial activities, and it is used by over 34,000 journals worldwide. On the other hand, the Erudit platform offers dissemination services to connect journals to research discovery systems. So, as I said, Coalition Publica's data is mainly text, that is, articles accompanied with their metadata, and it is almost entirely open access. I can't go in detail to explain why it is not completely open access, but we can talk about that afterwards if you want. Like traditional cataloging practices in libraries, digital discoverability depends a lot on the precise, systematic, and thorough identification of publication by their metadata. So metadata must be linked to the article in a standardized way to allow for an article to be found following a search, to be located, that is, to be accessed on the web, and then shared, for instance, as a bibliographic reference. Metadata is so key to online discoverability that their curation cannot be fully automated, and even partly automated digital production, as we're doing at Coalition Publica, include quality control, that is human work. And a mistake and a hole in metadata mean that the discovery chain may be broken and the article risks to become invisible even if it's somewhere. I don't know if it's really telling, but the parallel I thought of was to find a book in a library with the wrong shelf mark, for instance. But I would say at a deeper level, at a more complex level, which is the core of our work, all databases, all indexes, all search or discoverability tools do not require the same metadata and do not use the same metadata formats. And while some formats are open standard, as the one we use at Coalition Publica, others are proprietary and often quite opaque. So erudit.org is an index in itself. It can be searched, but it also offers metadata conversion and transfer to other indexes. It builds interoperability, which enhances articles' overall discoverability. Another thing I won't have time to talk about is our textual data repository. But we can talk about that in the Q&A afterwards, if you like. I had to make choices. The two other key elements of Coalition Publica, as a support for the Canadian publication system, is expertise and funding. Coalition Publica must be regarded, as most all MSI, of course, as a human infrastructure made of expertise and fostering collaboration with the different and very, the different stakeholder in a very complex environment of the Canadian scholarly publication system, in which, academic libraries are a key component, both regarding expertise and funding, the two aspects. Librarians are working directly with a journal hosted at their university, to whom they offer both technical support, for instance with OJS, but also advice and training, notably regarding best practices in digital publication, but also in open access practices. And in turn, Coalition Publica is supporting these librarians' work by sharing resource and documentation, as well as monitoring trends in practices and in policy in an environment that is changing extremely fast. Coalition Publica's leadership is built in its governance, which includes a library user group that is a site where the community is strengthened in itself. So the last key element regards funding. For the support provided by Coalition Publica to the Canadian journal community in its transition to open access, to a sustainable and fair open access. So journals, especially in social sciences and the humanities, often operate on shoestring budgets, relying on service from professors and graduate student work. So traditionally, this work was supported by grants and subscription revenue. The movement for open access requires to reconsider this economy completely, since subscription becomes irrelevant. And so the partnership for open access is designed to face this challenge as a way to support open access journals and knowledge dissemination at the level of the whole ecosystem. This implies a deep transformation in the relationship between journals and academic libraries, from a commercial relationship to collaboration. And if I have time, I would, this is important. Indeed, as well, this is well documented now, the vast majority of Canadian journals are independent, run by small editorial teams, and operate on what is called the Diamond Open Access model. That is the model in which neither readers pay to access journals, nor authors pay charges to publish their articles. So the money has to come from somewhere else, and that's why it's an ecosystemic issue. And so if I have time, okay, it's very, very short concluding notes on Indigenous studies and Indigenous knowledge dissemination. So I just want to mention that it's crucial to keep the OCAP principles in mind when considering Indigenous communities' data circulation, because it may impose restriction on what is shared, with whom, and how. But at Coalition Publica, for now, our work really takes place after research is done, and even after the ways in which its results will be shared are decided. So for now, our role is restricted to the dissemination of journals specializing in Indigenous studies. I put there the list of our, the journal specializing in Indigenous studies here that are supported by Coalition Publica. But if we think a bit ahead of decolonizing practices, there are several working areas that may be considered, from the most simple, at least technically, which is publication languages. It's already possible to publish in Indigenous languages. It's very rare. we could talk a bit more about metadata categories, which is a working area that's started to be tackled. And the last one, and I would say the deeper, in a way it's the deepest level, dissemination modes or mediums, because this issue brings the realm of indigenous knowledge per se, which cannot be conflated with indigenous studies. And it is often noted that written articles, and especially standardized scholarly articles, are not appropriate vehicles for indigenous knowledge, and that other modes should be privileged, for instance, audio or video recordings. So, and this inclusion, the inclusion of this kind of material within Coalition Publica's infrastructure and practices is not yet an area of investigation, but hopefully it will become in the future. Thank you very much.
And our final panelist is from Superdarn, lead engineer, Kevin Krieger. Kevin.
Love this setup, by the way. All right, real quickly here, I'm Kevin Krieger, and in the next 10 minutes, I hope to tell you the story of how data management has evolved over the past decade, from my perspective as an engineer with Superdarn Canada.
Okay, technical.
Oh, I went too far. Okay. Really quickly, for those of you who didn't get to the Saskatoon Superdarn site yesterday, the facility consists of about 37 high-frequency ground-based radars, both the northern and southern hemispheres. This just shows you the northern hemisphere radars and their fields of view. The Canadian ones are colored in red. We have 16 institutions as part of the International Superdarn Group across 10 countries. It's been in continuous operation since 1993. And historically, we generate about 10 gigabytes of radar data per radar per month. So it does add up. Each of these radars performs one full scan of their field of view. So this animation gives you an idea of how that looks in both northern and southern hemispheres. This data is uploaded to one of several data management sites across the world every day. Those are shown as the red dots here. The black dots are the actual radar facilities themselves, so it's global. And users across the world can access their data from whichever one of these 4 red sites they choose. I'll briefly go over the past 30 years of Superdarn. I will discuss in more detail the past decade, which I'm more familiar with. Just for fun, I looked up the first data file that the Saskatoon radar produced, and it was September 29th, 1993. So we just passed the 3-decade mark, which is a pretty cool milestone, I think. For storage media, for the first 20 years, Superdarn started with magnetic tape, very reliable. Maybe we should have stuck with that. Moved to optical media, so we got thousands of disks sitting in storage. We've used those. And then we finally moved to external hard drives, which can store a lot more data. 8 terabytes, 12 terabytes, 16 terabytes these days, as opposed to a few gigabytes for DVDs. These would be copied and sent to our international partners across the world. In 2013, we decided to get a little more organized. We formed an international group dedicated to data management. And we decided our first major task was to get online, distribute the data online and manage it online. So for the next year and a half, we ramped that up, and there were challenges with that. We started by serving data from a local university, Saskatchewan server here. In the next few years, we had an opportunity to move to the cloud. It's in quotation marks because it's just somebody else's server. I never really liked the cloud term, but there we are. In 2018, we had a data loss and recovery event, which the international community responded to by coming up with 2 or 3 more data management sites to provide some extra redundancy and resiliency to the whole system. In the last 4 years, new radar capabilities have meant increased data quantity and complexity, as well as some other things I'll discuss later. And of course, the work's never done. There's always ongoing challenges for 2023 and beyond. So, as I mentioned, 2013, 2014, we were getting organized, we were getting online. Some of the challenges that came with that, storage media failures. This may look familiar from one of the other talks here on the panel, but these are thousands of disks, as I mentioned, and if you get the cheap ones, they might just flake off. You can't use that disk anymore. This is just an example. External hard drives have their own problems. Being an international organization, cooperation, that comes with challenges too. Different groups have different data policies, different IT policies, slow internet speeds, packet boating. We have radars in Antarctica, so every 6 months, some of those radars ship their data via a hard drive on a boat, so we can't get those data in real time. Some countries have sporadic firewalls, so they can't access certain internet services in different countries, so that's a challenge from month to month. And consistency of funding across the international partners. Some of these partners, there's only 1 or 2 people in their group to maintain the radar, do the data management, perform the science. It's limiting. I believe that from making a clear goal, you can develop policies and procedures. And so what we started with was a goal. High quality, open, canonical data set that everybody could access in real time every day and access the full data set of SuperDarn data. So this is just a very simple flowchart of what would happen every day for one of our procedures. You can imagine in reality this would be a lot more complicated with many more arrows going in every which direction, more boxes, but basically level 1 radar data comes in on a daily basis. Check to see if it's nominal, if it's corrupt, if the file's corrupt, is the file empty, is it a duplicate of files we already have? If it's a duplicate, are the bits, the actual information in the file the same? If they're not the same, why? It has the PI for that data suggested that maybe this file shouldn't be in the distribution for some reason or another. Any problems, just quarantine that data automatically and alert me. Alert Kevin, that's the little stick guy right there. If everything's fine, just distribute it automatically to the international partners. And you can imagine that, as I mentioned, there's more complexity to this setup. It's nice to add humans in this automated loop. So semi-annually, we'll check for gaps in radar data where we expect there should be some files here, but they're missing. So we'll run a gaps check. If we see that they're gaps, alert the data manager for that radar, and they'll say, yes, these are real, or no, they're not real, and here are the files. And that way we can really flesh out our data set, make sure it's complete. So moving on to the cloud, this gave us an opportunity to scale up. We went from 10 terabytes in our local server here to 105 terabytes this year. So really an order of magnitude difference there in data storage space available. It also allowed us to scale up the amount of users we were able to directly give access to the data set from about 10 to upwards of 50 now. But it also came with its own challenges. We have less administrative control, of course, if it's not our server. It also comes with a proprietary transfer protocol, which means more clicks to get the data. Every extra click, every time you have to sign up to some other service, that adds more challenge. And as I mentioned, some people just don't have the time or the expertise. Change is difficult for people who don't have the time. That's just a diagram of how the amount of data we have in the distribution has ramped up over the last 30 years. I expect it to actually keep going up. As I mentioned, in the last 4 years, new capabilities have meant increased data amounts. This is a plot taken from a paper we published this year for a new digital radar system that we installed at our 5 Canadian radars. On the right, you can see the old time series data. On the left, you can see the new time series data. You can see the pixels are just that much tinier, which means we have, I think in this instance, it's 16 times more data. So that's a challenge that we're going to have to think about for the future. We need. It's not a linear scaling of data generation anymore. If all the radars across the network are going to implement this, or a subset, anyways. Another thing that's been interesting watching over the last decade is improved internet access in Canada's north. I just pulled up some of the bills that I paid, and the first one 10 years ago, I think this was on Baffin Island, $420 for a 1 month of 1 month of internet bandwidth. And the next year it went down $20 to $30, and then a couple years ago it's down $130 for the same, or better actually. The service keeps getting better. This year it's down to $115. Not to mention extra internet service providers like Starlink. We were there this summer. Everybody has Starlink on their roof now. So multiple ways to get access to information. This is one of my last slides. Ongoing challenges, 2023 and beyond. As I mentioned, varied funding agreements between international partners that has to be accounted for in our data policies. Diverging instrument hardware and software has to be accounted for in the policies as well. It adds complexity to the software that we use to collect and distribute the data, as well as to analyze the data. New instrument capabilities means increasing data quantity, as you saw, but also complexity. We have to deal with that as well. And being a 30-year project now, we have historical proprietary data formats that have changed over the course of the last 3 decades. And we need to be able to operate with that data. Scientists need to do large multi-year statistical studies on it. So they need to be able to access data from 1993 until today. Yeah, this is my last slide. I just want to leave you off with what I think were the biggest drivers of change for our data distribution system. Disruptive events are way up there. You learn from failures the best, I think. Opportunities that came up, the moving to better servers, defining a clear goal from which we can define policies and develop procedures at the ground level from there on. And that's it. Thank you. That was only 10 minutes.
So, we're running a little behind, that's my fault. For anybody who would like to pose questions to the panel, we ask that you come over to the microphone here on the right, and I see we already have one taker. So we'll plunge right into that, please.
Okay, sound like it's on. I mean, I guess the goal of science and science publication is to propose or proffer our very best interpretation of what is true. How can we make sure that Canadian science and the Canadian data that's been generated is well represented in the large language models that are being generated around the world nowadays?
Natalie or Suzanne, I think that one's at you.
Well, I guess the thing about AI is it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you're feeding it poor information, then that's what you'll get out the other side. So on the data side of things, and this is like really not my area of expertise, but I'll try talking about it anyway. On the data side of things, if you can follow procedures to ensure data quality, so standardized metadata that's rich and describes things well, and you ensure that the data that's being put in and out there in whatever kind of way that can be absorbed by these large language models, if you can ensure quality there, you get a better output. That doesn't fix the problem of poor information going into the large language models, but you bite off the size of a bite that you can chew. That would be my first response to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I completely agree with what Natalie said, and thinking about it, our situation is quite singular because we indeed manage and maintain a quite huge data repository, which could be used very well to train AI, but in large language models, but it's mostly text. So it's not science data as such, but it's one of the, probably in fact the largest data set or collection of data sets of French language in the text in the world. And as such, it's extremely, there's a high potential for using it to train, because it's quite, very high quality. There's no hole. It covers the whole 20th century, which is not the case, for instance, in the textual data repository in France because of legal issues. So, yeah, there's a high potential there because it's very specific, and also it's specific to Canadian French, but it can also be searched for other. This is different. It's not your question. But yeah, there's a very high potential for training in this for training. I would say high quality large language models, but for French. Yeah, so it's a bit different from you.
Natalie, you had another comment? Yep.
Yeah, just to add to what I said now that I've had a second to think about it. You know, where you choose to store your data and make it accessible, if that's what you're trying to do, I think is really key as well. So there is a concept of trustworthy digital repositories. You can have repositories that are certified and go through very rigorous procedures to make sure that they're you know, that they're working in the way that they should, and that they have the right expertise and curation behind them. I think one of the things behind the FAIR principles as well is around the need for there to be discipline-specific knowledge behind the repositories where data are shared. So this really depends on the discipline that you're working in. In a lot of cases, you may be sharing data directly through your own infrastructure. But if you're looking at the case where you're depositing the outputs of research into more generalized repositories, then using those that support the disciplinary work that you do is better, because the expertise is there for curation, for understanding, for, again, for metadata quality, for compatibility. The expertise should be in the institution that runs that. So that's just a couple things to add there.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I mean, I think that there is an opportunity, right? Because you do say garbage in, garbage out, and there's obviously a lot of garbage on the internet. But I think this would be an opportunity to actually put high quality data and Canadian data into the large language models in a way that the data represents truth and correct output at some level as well as representing Canadian science.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Please.
I'm wondering about experience with narrative data, narrative-based data or natural language data, and the challenges of, one, translating it for different users who may be fluent in a different language, and two, the potential impact, good or bad, of AI like ChatGPT on the utilization of this sort of narrative natural language data? Or is that the next frontier?
I'd like to pass this to my colleague.
That's okay. I can ask it at the next workshop.
I'm not sure that I entirely understand the question. So
some data obviously is reduced to very standardized variables, individual variables. Some of it might be mathematically or numerically based. Narrative data can also be abstractions from interviews with individuals. So it would be in a specific language, English-based or French-based. If in a world of shared data and open science, we have to also deal with this narrative data. That narrative data might require translation by the user to understand it, to be able to aggregate it. And presumably, it could be utilized and evaluated by using a tool like ChatGPT. And so have we actually considered how we manage, how we share narrative data, how to make it most useful in an international environment or even in a multilingual Canadian environment?
I don't know if that challenge is a new one, if it has to do with sharing in a digital environment, or if that's a similar challenge that we have working in a multilingual environment. So I don't really know how to answer that, and I'm definitely going to pass it on to these two.
No, it's clearly, how can I say, it's a new, and it's going very fast, but it's a new challenge or really a new development field for, like in the case of academic or scholarly publication, that's for sure the issue of how to use this potential of automated translation, but in a way, in a proper way, and there are many issues related to this automation of translation. Of course, accuracy is one, but yeah, there are many issues, and there are different ways in which I'm not a specialist, but it's clearly a field of investigation now. There are also ethical questions, because translation has to, how can I say that? This work has been done, like to be able to automate that, it means that actual translators have been doing the work and now it's automated. So translators somehow are dispossessed of, there's the whole ethical issues regarding this work or this automation. And also, yeah, it's clearly at the front. It's one of the front work that is currently devised. I'm not a specialist in I would say in my field. Someone could be
I have
more
another
precise.
thought.
But,
Yeah,
go
I had
ahead.
another thought. They're coming slowly. It's early in the morning. So I guess one thing to say is that if automatic translation tools have been used to provide other versions in different languages of that data, then you need to indicate that in the provenance metadata. That's what I would say. So will we get perfect translations? Certainly not. Are there dangerous implications around that? There could be, depending on what happens with that automated translation. So, you know, I would say one of the best things you can do is to indicate what process the data has gone through to come out in that other language and provide tracing for that. If you don't, if those tools aren't used and you're making something available only in one language, then the user will use tools to translate it. But that's a little bit more on them in the sense of trying to get it right. That's the best advice I could give there.
Yes. Next.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we did with that type of data. What saved us was metadata associated with the narrative. And what we further did was link that metadatum with other metadata in the system that is related. So when one type of metadatum is happened upon, then it's linked to other things that further support it. So the narrative is supporting the other, perhaps some sort of model. The model, in turn, is also supported by the narrative and so on. So that's what we tried to do.
Sorry, where do you come from?
Oh, from the Global Water Futures Observatories.
Okay. Thank you. Next question, please.
So Nigel Smith, Triumph. So somebody, an organization that uses big data, I'd be interested to hear the panelists' intersection with the Digital Research Alliance, who are going through a process at the moment of developing a strategic vision, and whether they see the Digital Research Alliance having major roles in their fields.
Thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, actually, we've been utilizing those resources for years now. And as I mentioned in the talk, we've been able to scale up the amount of users that we can give direct access to the data and the amount of storage space that we utilize. There's also compute resources available directly on the server that has the storage. And our data does have to go through some processing steps to make it usable for the end users. So it's come in very handy for us, and I hope to see it continue.
When you say using those resources, do you mean paying for them, or are they, how does that work?
I don't think we actually had to pay anything,
Okay.
but we apply for it, and if the application is strong, we do get what we asked for. But I think the competition is fierce.
Yes, another question here.
Yeah, hi, Heidi Ibrahim from ALS. I have one question regarding, for example, for the SuperDARN infrastructure. Do you also think about reducing the amount of data stored by not saving the original basic data, but doing some pre-processing and only saving like specific amount of statistics like average values or something like this at one point? Because I mean, you need to back up your data. It's more and more data points. At one point, it's also just a gigantic amount of data that is everywhere that needs to be stored, that requires a lot of electricity to be stored, and so on.
Yes, we've excuse me. Yes, we've thought about that actually. So the data that is directly collected at the radar sites is level 0 data, and it's the direct digitization of the voltage waveforms from our antennas. That is it's orders of magnitude larger than the data we give to our researchers, our users. But we do back it up on hard drives at our research site, our radar sites. And because we do that because if a researcher wants to go and do some other type of experiment with that data, they can go and reproduce other secondary data products with the very basic level 0 data. So it does come in handy, but we don't actually, we haven't actually been giving it to users unless they specifically request it, which is not very often. So, yeah, stuff we do send out is pared down quite a bit.
So no one's at the microphone at the moment. I had a question for you, Kevin. You mentioned that a lot of your experience came from things that went wrong on your final slide, and that you were grateful for the experiences that you had. But you put a quick comment that raised the hackles on the back of my neck during your earlier presentation, where you said you had a data loss and recovery event. I don't think anybody in this room is comfortable with the idea of data loss and having to save it. Could you provide a little more detail about what exactly that event was, whether it was network-wide, and what did you do to recover?
No. It was just on our one server.
Okay.
And so everybody across the network has a copy of the data.
Okay.
But the problem is, it took about a month of on and off work to recover all the data from backups because of limited resources from our partners. And also, you saw my image of those CDs and DVDs. If you go to read 1,000 discs, you're probably going to go through a couple of disk drives. So it takes time. And so the majority of the recovery was done from those disks, but for the last few percent, I had to go and request somebody else in the network, some of our colleagues across seas, to actually get the data.
Okay.
Yeah. And it would have taken much less time and effort if we had those 3 or 4 data management sites across the world already set up and already mirroring each other. Mm-hmm. Would have been a one-day event.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll just add that I think, I think digital preservation is an entirely different activity than storage and backup. So if you have data that you need on an ongoing basis and you have legacy data that you will need to access in the future, you want to make sure that you're following digital preservation procedures, which is an ongoing maintenance, right? To ensure not only that you avoid loss, but that you can still access that kind of data, because software and hardware changes all the time, right?
Yeah. Suzanne, I had another question for you, if I could. You mentioned that 2% of your data was not completely open access, and since 2% as a general rule in business causes 100% of your problems, would you care to describe that 2% and what was unique and interesting about it?
No, in fact, it's very simple, is that most journals that are disseminated or supported by Coalition Publica and disseminated are fully open access. And so all their content is immediately available freely, but still some journals are disseminating behind a moving wall. That is, their most recent issues are only accessible through subscription.
Okay.
So their archive is like, after a year, the articles become open access. But
okay.
There's still this, and it's the legacy, and it's still compliant with current policies, SURE policies, which is being revised right now, so we don't know how it's gonna evolve, but yeah, this very small amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about a data repository.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you speak to what that is and how that relates to the publications?
Yeah, so it's this very large textual data repository, which is made of all of the articles disseminated on Equity, which is like a pretty big archive of current issues, but also archive of those journals, but also material, digitized documents from Canadiana, CRKN, from Library and Archive Canada, and Bibliothèque et Archives Nationales du Québec, so the Quebec National Library. And so it's a huge, and there are also smaller, how can I say, smaller collections from Truth and Reconciliation, reports from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for instance. And so these are collections that are digitized, OCRs, how can I say, they are treated with OCR, and they are searchable in many ways, and it's a quite huge collection. It's 24 terabytes of text, so yeah.
So it's an article repository?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, it's really text in that sense. It's article, reports.
So I'm getting the checkered flag from Sandra here, which means we're out of time. I want to thank all the panelists for your work and putting together your presentations, what you've shared here, to all of you for attending and for the questions we've had. Thank you very much. End of panel 4.